and we are live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Freedom Dreaming, Transforming Justice Through Art. My name is Mazi, and I'm here with
India.
And we are your MCs for tonight. This event is brought to you by Racial Justice Organizing Committee, which is a group of activists and advocates who are working towards the abolition of white supremacy and racism in all ways they present themselves in our community and in schools. They teamed up with Poppin, presenting our perspective on Philly Youth News, which is a youth media program that seeks to highlight the stories, concerns, and the resilience of young people in our city. We gather here tonight in honor of BLM Week of Action, which is a nationwide group of people organizing for racial justice in education. But it all started right here in Philly. We know that, sorry. Although we are intentional about celebrating this week, we know that the work and struggle continues all year round.
With that being said, this past year was definitely a struggle and resilience with Black and Brown people, from taking actions in the street to bring justice and organizing for voting rights, all in the midst of a pandemic. This event, Freedom Dreaming, Transforming Justice Through Art, is inspired by the work that have been happening on the ground and seeking to envision what a safer environment looks like for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, especially in school environments. The rundown of tonight's show will begin with the screening of the trailer to Poppin's documentary, which will lead us into discussion about the school to prison pipeline. Then we will dream up some alternatives to punishment and policing, one of which is art and expressive therapy. We'll watch another Poppin produced video on art therapy and go into a discussion about what it is and what it looks like and how it could be implemented. Following that, we'll think through some action steps to hear from local organizations on how to support and uplift their demands and to just have a safe, equitable school environment. So without that, further ado, let's begin tonight's program.
I don't feel as though anybody should be placed in this environment if they want them to thrive. But this is way more like a prison than any other school I've ever been to.
A lot of times the school police officers are showmen. They like to put on a scene when they're in front of their boss.
No, they never told me the reason for arresting me. I was not hostile. I was not attacking anyone. I did not plan to harm anyone.
But people are actually getting punished for minor things. Stuff that really you should probably be like, all right, just bring your parents up. Or, no, since you did that, go out, go clean the lunchroom. Stay with your teacher and help them put the books up or something like that. They don't do stuff like that. They do actually suspension, expelled.
There's nothing about the system that's meant to help any of us pass.
I hope you all enjoyed the trailer for Calling Out to Change by Poppin. Both of the videos that we screened tonight will be available in the resource guide. So after watching the trailer, we would like the audience to write in the comments one word that comes to mind when someone says school to prison pipeline. And then we also want you to write a word that describes what a safe school would look like. So transformation or freedom dreaming. Be sure to stay to the end of the program to find out what we're going to be doing with these words.
Some people have said they heard the school to prison pipeline. I'm about to look in the chat what they be saying.
Yeah, I'm looking for you guys' answers right now.
What y'all thinking? How y'all feel about the topic?
So I'm seeing words like police and death. Those are really strong words. Someone said care, tragic, unfair.
Cruel.
Control, yeah. From YouTube, someone said injustice. A lot of injustice.
Intentional. Definitely. I saw harmful and oppression.
Yeah. Violence. Are there any more words for what people want to see safer schools look like? People want it to be a nurturing environment. Yeah, freeing. Yeah, liberating, safe, pro-Black, joyful. I'm loving these words, guys. You guys are right on point. So now that we've heard what people think of, some people still might be wondering, what exactly is the school to prison pipeline? Well, the school to prison pipeline is a process of criminalizing youth that is carried out by disciplinary policies and practices within schools that put students in contact with law enforcement. For a more in-depth look at what the school to prison pipeline is, I encourage you to watch the Calling Out for Change in its entirety.
To further explain and understand the impact it has on our school/environment, we have set a panel of students, educators, parents, lawyers, and organizers. As we go through today's panel, please remember to introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, and what your title is. So jumping directly in this film, we heard one of the subjects say their school feels like a prison because they have a lot of police present in their school. We would like to ask our student panelists, do you feel safe in school? And do the police make you feel safe?
Hi, my name is Zahim. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm here on behalf of Power. And me, from my own personal experience, I do feel like police do play a good role in schools. Like I've dealt with some officers who are kind and like they'll just talk to you and like de-escalate situations. However, there are schools with policemen who just like to fuel their own egos and feel like they're on the beat cop and want to rescue students and sometimes even tase students, throw them to the ground. And I feel like cops like those have no place in schools.
Thank you so much, Zahim, for your perspective. Does Mai or Neve have anything to add?
Hi, my name is Nevaeh, and I use she, her pronouns, and I don't feel safe with police in schools because they feel like they're threatening, like just watching them and feeling like I'm going to be arrested or something happened to me just because they didn't like how I look or my hair was braided or I had long nails or something.
Thank you,
Hey
Nevaeh.
everybody. I was gonna say something. So my name is Tamai. I'm from the Youth Art and Self Empowerment Project. And when I used to go to school, my experience, I don't believe that police in schools are safe at all. I feel as though sometimes they take their power to a certain extent, whereas those not needed in the school area. I feel as though that's not needed in any schools. At the end of the day, they are students and they need to be treated like kids, not adults, you know. And that's my opinion.
Yeah. I have another question. What is it like being in an underfunded school, even during the pandemic? Like, how have you guys been supported or not during this pandemic in school?
Me personally, I feel like to be honest, it's terrible. Like I just had a chance to go back to my school, being that sports season is starting back up, and they spent more time over this almost a year fixing the doors than they did actually improving air quality. So we still can't even use the gym and inside facilities. It's just I feel like they're just wasting their time and just wasting tax dollars at this point.
Yeah.
I feel as though that it's gotten worse because even though I didn't get to go back inside my school building, when we're on the computer, it's like no connection between the teacher and the students. It's just do your work, and they don't even come to help sometimes.
What about you, Mai? Do you have any perspective you'd like to share?
I don't go to school right now, so I really don't know how it's like for the kids who go to school during the pandemic. But I'm sure I've seen some kids go to school and stuff, but I'm sure it's not even a safe environment because I'm pretty sure they didn't add anything to the school as though it's a safe precaution for the kids who go to school.
Yeah, and actually take the correct steps.
Yeah, exactly. So they can be safe.
Yeah, and prioritizing the right things. So how has the school to prison pipeline affected your life in school, out of school? How is conflict dealt with in school or when you were in school?
I feel as though at one point in time I was locked up before. And when I was going to school, I went to the youth school. It was one of the schools that was newly open. And when I used to live in Texas for like 4 years. So during my 4 years, I had great experience in schools in Texas. And that just go to show that Philly needs to fund more money to schools because in Texas, the schools were so nice. Like it was a big, nice school. Food was wonderful. Everything was nice. They had enough staff for everybody, like to teach and stuff. And it was such a good experience, and everybody in there liked the school. Now, when I moved back to Philly, and I was in school, and I started school there. It was just such a big difference because the school was just dirty. Food was nasty. I felt like I didn't want to be there. So at one point in time, probably like in my 11th grade year in high school, I dropped out of school because I didn't feel like they was teaching me anything. I didn't feel like I learned anything. And that's like, and seeing the police every single day, it just reminds you of like, yeah, like the school to prison pipeline. It just shows that it's just an environment they put us in that makes us feel like we're not at a school. And so when I got locked up probably like when I dropped out of school in my 11th grade year, and that just goes shows like you know how it really happens with the school to prison pipeline because like I was just at school, next day I know I was locked up, and it was just like a crazy experience. But I feel as though like schools, if they defund the police and fund in more of the schools, I feel like these kids gonna have a great education. I had a great education in Texas. Like it just goes to show and a proof evidence that they need to defund the police. They need to do something about it because these kids, this dirty. This like the schools in Philly is dirty. Like it's not clean. They're not sanitized. And when I went to school, I feel as though like it was just nasty, and I didn't want to be there. I didn't feel like I learned anything. So that's just how I felt.
My first time going into a school with like metal detectors and heavy police influence was fifth grade. And all I can say is like my first day there, I was horrified. Like I felt more like I was going into a correctional facility than a place for learning. And thinking back on it now, I only can imagine how many people felt as though like they were just being bred to be criminalized off break before even having a chance. It's like you get more used to going through metal detectors than you do opening your textbooks. And the textbooks were 20, 30 years old. Like it was like you could get textbooks that your parents had if y'all went to the same school, and it was just sad.
When I went to from like 3rd to 5th grade, it was a bad experience. Like the books were outdated. We barely had enough supplies for everybody in the classroom, barely enough desks for everybody in the classroom. And there was like not enough like ventilation in those classrooms. So in the summertime it'd be really hot, or sometimes the building will lose heat and it'd be really cold. And sometimes it was hard to find working water fountains in those schools. And the food was just terrible. It was horrible. It wasn't food that a kid would want to eat.
Thank you, students, for sharing your perspective on that. I want to give a little bit of my perspective, and maybe India might have something to add as well. For me, the school to prison pipeline has directly affected my life in a lot of ways, some of which I spoke about in the documentary. More recently, though, I've found that um, it's really about finding the support. Like, because the schools are underfunded, we aren't supported. So even now during the pandemic, like, it's really hard to get in touch with a counselor if you need it. I've been in a situation where I've interacted with a lot of homeless youth, and they've especially been impacted, not having a stable home, and then now not also not having stable schools. That's just pushing people more towards a life of crime. So I definitely agree with Mai's point about defunding the police and funding schools.
Yeah, I also agree and about prioritizing the right things and prioritizing your student wellness and actually caring for them. When it comes to comfort and wellness, in my school during the pandemic, I feel like it been terrible. When it comes to the small amount of Black children that attends to my school, and constantly seeing Black people being terrorized on social media and television, they just act like nothing happened. Um, so when it comes to the right things that should be prioritized, it hasn't been at all. And it's been frustrating for people to act like there's nothing going on and that our livelihood is not on the line. And this is not happening in our backyards.
Thank you guys so much for sharing your perspective. But I think we also should get some parent perspective. So for our parent on the call, how does the school to prison pipeline affect other parents and your children?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sierra. Um, I am the vice president of Philadelphia Homeless School Council. I'm also an organizer in other spaces here in the city. Born and bred Philadelphian, a parent, uh, and an organizer. Right, and for me, it's defund the police forever. Get police out of our kids' schools forever. I remember, just like the young man on the call mentioned earlier, being in middle school, being in, because it starts in middle school, right? That's when you start to see the metal detectors. Being in high school and walking through these metal detectors. And now, as a parent, seeing two completely different situations. My one youngest kid goes to a school where she never has to worry about that. And my oldest daughter, even though she goes to a special admit school here in the city, and though the presence of metal detectors and the police presence isn't as heavy as some of the other more heavily populated schools, it's still there, and it shouldn't be there. We should absolutely be reallocating that money towards making sure there are behavioral health supports, more TSS workers, more getting the community into these schools to help to care for the children the way that they have been anyway, and actually paying them the money that they should have to do it. Um, and that's how other parents feel as well. We absolutely don't think that, not, and I can't speak for everyone, but there are by and large a lot of parents who feel like there should not be a police presence in the schools. And it's going to be something that we continue to push for as organizers in the city, and something as a parent that we're going to continue to fight against.
Thank you so much for that. I heard you talk a little bit about some of the resources that you think should be in schools. So right now, do you feel like the school is doing everything it can to ensure that your kids have a successful future?
What I can say right now about that is that our schools are completely underfunded. They're underfunded, and the money that they do have, they're using for the wrong reasons. So folks can draw whatever conclusions they want from that. What I will absolutely say is that there should be more books and less walking through metal detectors. There should absolutely be more counselors. There should be more moms and dads and community members in the schools and paid to show up for those students that need it. And there should be the fostering of community, because what is Philadelphia but a community of neighborhoods? There should be more fostering of community and just more folks in the schools that care about the kids being there to be able to help them to reach their educational potential.
Thank you so much for your perspective. I agree with everything you said and then some. So we also have some educators on the call today representing Racial Justice Organizing Committee, Parapower. We have a school psychologist and a music therapist. So this next question goes out to you guys. How does the school to prison pipeline relate to your work? And does it play out in your building or if you're in multiple buildings? You guys each have about 2 minutes each for your response.
Okay, who's going first?
I can go first.
Okay.
I'm Coleman, a school psychologist at the School District of Philadelphia. I use she, her pronouns. I became a school psychologist because I had 3 Black brothers who went through school and had their own experience, some bad and some good. For example, one of my brothers was suspended for like a semester from a school. So the school to prison pipeline has directly impacted me. It plays out in my current building. I have 2 buildings. I have an elementary school and a high school. Even at my elementary, there's no metal detectors. However, there's a police officer that sits in the front at the front desk. At my high school, students are required to go through the metal detector when they come through the door, and all of that. We spend a lot of money on all of that type of stuff, and we have a lack of. We don't have art. There's the art teacher at my high school volunteers. So we're not properly funded in any areas at both of my schools. But the art teacher at my high school is a volunteer. So those are some of the weaknesses that we have. And I have a special admit high school in Philadelphia. So we definitely have something to think about with that, with the lack of funding.
Thank you, Komanich.
All right, I'll guess I'll go. My name is Leah. She, her. I'm with Parapower. I am a classroom assistant at Feltville School of Arts and Sciences. So I deal with special needs kids all day, especially autism, because those are my babies. And I'm also an auntie to 3 with autism. So they're older now, but the school to prison pipeline and all of this, it really affects them because, especially with special ed, they're more prone to be arrested and targeted for behavior because they're not understood. And if they're overloaded, straight in handcuffs. No one cares. And it's a shame, like they don't have enough training to understand those things, what's going on inside of a child's head, especially if you're autistic or MDS. All you see them as a threat. And I can honestly say that my nephew is incarcerated now because he didn't understand. And it was no fault of his own, but he's still incarcerated because, he just not took the deal, but he had friends that weren't his friends. And that's another thing with the school to prison pipeline is there's not enough time. It's so horrible sometimes. And my kids in my school, there's not any melded professor. He's pretty nice. He listens to kids, understands. But I know there are other reasons at all. So that is a lot targeted because they're not understood. I'm always freezing.
Thank you, Leah, for your perspective, and I appreciate you for sharing your story about your nephew.
Thank you.
I guess I can go next. My name's Ishmael Jimenez, he, him. I've been a teacher in School District of Philadelphia for the last 12 years. First at Germantown High School until they closed in the Great Purge in 2013, and now in Kensington. So working in Germantown and Kensington has given me a unique perspective at the intersection of what a school to prison pipeline actually looks like, where they're actually preparing our children to just be prisoners in a system rather than educate them. So when I see this in my work, I see it reinforced through structures of oppression in school buildings, where teachers are considered doing their job good if they're reinforcing those structures of oppression. So when it comes to the work as an educator, it's very personal, and you're in the midst of it all the time, of that reinforcement of people being marginalized and pushed to the side of our society, and then slated to be socialized into a system that just like chews them and spits them out into a society that folks aren't given the tools necessary to understand how to transverse it, to keep it simply.
Thank you, Ishmael.
Hello, I'm like on a quick break here. I know, because I'm doing the Freedom Dreaming Black Lives Matter.
Excuse me, Lee. Thank you.
So this is Amanda, she, her pronouns. I'm a music therapist currently for Easter Seals. So I see the school to prison pipeline play out in the way that I have only ever worked in an alternative school. So I've only ever worked with students once they have already been suspended or expelled, or have already been in a juvenile detention center or something similar like that. And it's frustrating for me as a music therapist to get to interact and work with these students, knowing that if they had access to some of this creativity and expression before they had gotten to me, then maybe some of their situations could have been prevented. So for me, it's a little frustrating to see music therapy be used just in moments of crisis or when something has already occurred instead of a preventative measure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your perspective. Does anyone else have anything they want to add before we move on to the next section? I'll take the silence as a no, but again, thank you all for your perspectives. So we all know none of this happened by accident. So we have a law expert here present to answer a few questions about the more technical side of things. So to our law expert, how did we get here? What policies have led to this? And what is the impact, or how has this shown up during COVID and or with remote learning?
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Paige Jokey, and I am a staff attorney at the Education Law Center in the Philadelphia office, where I specialize in working with young people who are experiencing homelessness on their own or with their families. And I also lead the Black Girls Education Justice Initiatives out of the Philadelphia office. Thank you for your question. Obviously, we are here today and have the systems we do, not by accident, because they're intentional. So if you think back to American slavery, the education of Black people was cast as a specific and grave threat to that institution. And despite those horrible and oppressive and dehumanizing conditions, Black people have always made intentional investments in fulfilling their material needs and also intellectual ones. And in response to that, our schools and our communities have been disinvested in, and policies have been put in place to make sure that Black and brown children don't have what they need to thrive at school, to be in educational environments where they feel celebrated and to get what they need. And so none of this is accident, it's very by design, even if that appears normal. It isn't. This is the way that the system was designed to work. It doesn't have to work that way, but it is working very well as it was designed, which we have to change. So your second question, what policies get us there? I think we have a bunch of different policies at play. We can think of school discipline policies that punish students for their physical bodies. So showing up Black in a space is criminalized at school. You're made to feel like you're unwanted in the educational environment. We have policies that don't help students get what they need. Does a student need special education? Do they need mental health support? Do they need to have the adults in the building interacting with them in a different way? Do they need curriculum that looks like them, that is affirming? Do you feel seen and loved at school? And we have policies that stand in the way of that, like the discipline policies. Another one I deal with a lot is parental exclusion notices. So you have particularly Black mamas showing up to school, something has happened with their child, where their child's rights have been violated, and they are given a piece of paper that says, if you come to school, we'll consider that to be trespassing unless you have an appointment, and we'll arrest you. We have harassment and bullying policies that don't prevent students from being harmed for who they are at school. So school can feel really toxic, a place where people don't want to be. And if your school looks like a jail, it feels like a jail, it's not a place that you're going to feel like you can be transformed and learn, which is what educational spaces should do. So I'd encourage anybody who's curious about what the rules in your school are to look at your school code of conduct. There are lots of schools who don't allow students to show up like I'm looking today with braids, right? That's a problem when our bodies are being disciplined in that way. How is this shown up in COVID-19? Question number 3, all sorts of ways. There are new ways that students are disciplined and excluded. So we have access issues. Like, do you have access to a device that works? Do you have quality internet? I'm probably breaking up now because I've been having some struggles with that. Do I have a teacher who understands what's going on? Do I have a stable place to live? Do I have food to eat? Do I have electricity? Do I have heat? All of these things compound a student's journey when they get to school. In terms of how does discipline look on Zoom, more things than I can imagine. And I'm learning about new ones every day. So sometimes kids are stuck in the waiting room. They're muted. Their cameras are turned off. They're not allowed to interact with their teachers. They're told you can't log on. They're punished for having too many questions in the chat. They're ignored in the classroom. So there are unfortunately a lot of new ways that discipline is showing up, and there are ways we have to address it. Or they're being punished because something's in the background. Or maybe there's somebody else in the background, right? Not all of us have the luxury of a quiet individual space. And so unfortunately, in this moment where we all need support and understanding and action, our schools and the students in the schools are being met with discipline and exclusion. And that really does need to change. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So you touched on a lot of ways that it manifests itself during the time of COVID. Do you think you could talk a little bit more about truancy? I know that's a really big issue that's affecting especially POC communities right now.
Yes, absolutely. So you have a legal obligation to go to school if you're between the ages of 6 and 16. 6 and 18. The law just changed this year. So 6 and 18. And what happens if you don't go to school is you're considered to be truant if you accrue a certain amount of absences, and really bad things can happen when students face barriers to attending school. These are unexcused absences. So parents can be put in jail. They can be fined. Students can be taken out of their homes, involved with DHS, paying fines, not able to get driver's licenses. And so when you have toxic conditions in schools and students either can't get to school for whatever reason or feel unsafe and don't go, these are the systems that then punish our families. And the families that are disproportionately impacted by truancy look a lot like us, right? They're Black and brown communities, especially if you have a school that is willing to accept notes from some families and not others. We know that that plays out along the lines of race. And if your school knows that there's something that's going on and can meet you with supports, which by the way, you need funding for those supports, those school situations look a lot differently than the schools where many of our community members go, where if you're not going, the response is going to be very severe and very punitive, rather than asking like, what do we need to get you to school? What would make you want to come? What do you need to feel safe and affirmed there? Those aren't the questions being asked. It's you didn't come, here's the consequence.
Right.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you for your answer. And I would assume that, well, it's not even just an assumption. I know from being a virtual learner, it's even harder to quote, get to school when it's virtually. You know, some kids have trouble waking up early. Some kids don't feel comfortable being up there early when their parents are getting ready for work and stuff like that. So how do we combat that? How do we combat these policies that are in place?
I think one of the best things we can do is educate ourselves and our community members, right? Our schools are part of the community ecosystem. And so when there are disinvestments in the community and over policing in the community, we know that that's going to come into school, and all the trauma that that brings is also going to come into school. So if folks are curious about learning their rights, Education Law Center, where I work, has a wonderful website that has free resources where you can learn about what your rights are. You can learn about what do I do if I'm stuck in a side classroom on the Zoom? What do I do if I feel like my rights are being violated? What do I do if my mom's told she can't come to school because there was an argument because something happened to me that shouldn't have? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is be vocal and be loud. We deserve to have spaces. Go to school board meetings, testify, make your voices known, show up in spaces, show up proudly Black in spaces, right? Like we deserve to be seen fully when we go to school. We're all here for it. So let's push those things, talk to decision makers, call the people that represent you and explain what your school conditions are, get involved. Education Law Center and Public Interest Law Center are suing the state right now for fair funding. It started in 2014 and it's still going. So get involved, make your voices heard. Describe what the conditions are like in your school. I think that can be very powerful. I think sort of the messages I hear a lot as a lawyer are, oh, you need to go to school, but nobody's talking about the conditions in schools, right? It's too hot or too cold, it's unsafe for me. There are rodents there. They aren't clean. There aren't counselors. There aren't enough desks. There aren't enough books that make sense. And so all those things really matter, and speaking your truth matters. And visioning a future beyond this matters, because as Black people, this is always something we've done. It's a strength, and we have to keep doing it. Is that this is not our destiny. There's so much more out there for us.
Thank you so much, Paige, for your answer. Do you think you'll have time to just run us what are students' rights?
There are a lot of different student rights in different contexts. Here are a few big ones. You have the right to be in school in Pennsylvania from age 6 to age 21. That means even if you're 21 and you left school, you can still go back and get a diploma. You have rights to due process and truancy, right? They can't just take you out of your home. They can't just lock your parents up in jail. That's not how it works. There are protections. There are rights if you're a student who has disabilities and needs specific supports to learn. There are protections for you for not being harassed or bullied at school. There are protections for if you are accused of violating a school rule, to make sure that there are procedures in place to make sure rights are respected. And all these things are pretty complicated, and I welcome you to learn more about them. But there are a lot of different ways that students have rights in school, but sometimes the message that students and families and communities, and even I get as a lawyer, is, oh, there's no right to that. That was totally fine. So what I would encourage you to do is, if something happens and you think it's not right, to try to trust your gut and investigate whether or not that's something that is wrong. Yes, it is. And whether or not it's against the law, because it just might be.
Thank you so much, Paige. And we'll make sure to have the resource guide include the link to your website. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'll also drop ELT's helpline in the chat. So if folks need to reach a lawyer, it's free. Give us a ring. We're happy to help you out.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lot to take in. We just want to take a moment to take a breath and check in. Panelists and those at home, in a word or two, how are you feeling right now? Drop your response in the comments. So now that we have heard about the school to prison pipeline and its impacts, we would like to use this time to discuss some alternatives. One alternative that educators have educated, one alternative that organizers have advocated for is more funding towards counselors and not cops. PSU is one of the leaders on this effort at a local level. So we'd like to ask Amanda, what does this campaign mean, and how has the school district responded to this?
I believe Amina couldn't join us tonight, but Fred is here on her behalf. Fred, do you mind picking up this question for us?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. And Amina apologizes for not being able to be here, but my name's Fred. I'm with the Philadelphia Student Union. So yeah, we have a campaign calling for police-free schools. where we believe that if schools truly care about students, then it wouldn't spend so much time and energy, and especially resources, on activities that police them, like having school police, metal detectors, surveillance, and a lot of the other things that various panelists here have discussed. So we're calling for the district to change the focus of the Office of School Safety, to remove its focus on school policing and focus on other aspects of safety, kind of like some of the topics we'll be discussing later today in terms of art therapy, restorative practices, more roles for community members, and other things like that in schools. The School District of Philadelphia spends $31 million on policing every year, or at least as of the last budget that we took a look at. And that money could be spent in other ways that would also keep students safe in their schools.
Thank you. Komichi, as a school psychologist, how has the school district supported you? What has your day-to-day observation been in school, and what resources do you need in particular?
My name is Komanich, but as a school psychologist, no worries. As a school psychologist, I feel like the district doesn't always allow us, in the school district of Philadelphia, doesn't always allow us to do other things. We're kind of like pigeonholed to evaluating students, and there's not a lot of support around us doing a lot of work that we're trained to do. So on the day-to-day, I'm not always able to interact with students. I'm not always able to support students in different ways. That's oftentimes given to the counselor who's overloaded. There's one counselor at both of my school buildings, and so she has a lot to do. So sometimes she can't always respond to every student. So I think that the school district we could definitely use more school psychologists, and we can receive support by allowing us to do other things besides evaluating students.
What other resources do you need other than like support?
I think we would like to, as a school psychologist, I would like to see us be able to just do more things. I would like us to, because right now where the school district has backed up on the things that evaluations, and so I feel like there need more school psychologists so that we can in turn have the opportunity to do additional things like work with students, run a group, or provide some mental health support.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. In addition to trauma-informed counselors, studies have shown that art programs can also be used as interventions for behavioral health crisis. We would like to ask our youth panelists, how do you imagine using art to transform into justice?
So Zahim, Fred, or Mai, would you guys like to pick up the question? If not, I might have something to add.
Can you undisable my video?
I think Fred has that ability.
Okay, all right, there we go. Okay, as far as art, I'm gonna be honest, I cannot draw, but I do feel as though like other forms of art such as poetry and rap, like two of my favorite, are very like beneficial towards like transforming justice, because you're able to like to really speak your mind and get your word out there, and a lot of people resonate to like spoken word and rap, and like it really, like you're really able just to say what you feel in any words that you want and not be judged by it. And I just feel like that's a good way to explain, like express yourself.
Sorry, yo, I can answer that too. How can we use art to transform justice? I think I had this question answered earlier. Let me see. I would say All right, I'm gonna give y'all an example. When I was locked up at one point in time, and I was on State Road in jail. So my organization, we was coming to the jails every Saturday to do armed poetry with the young kids that are in jail. So I was the only kid at the time. So when she came in to do armed poetry with me, it was just a space for me to express myself, like through poetry, art. And when I was in middle school and high school, I really didn't get to have classes where we can experience art and stuff. I always thought art was lame. So when I got to experience that, it just opened up to a whole new place for me so I can express myself. And I feel like that can transform justice, because that's just like, I was in there depressed for a while because I was there by myself and I was in solitary confinement. But just being able to go through the art workshops, it helped me change me a lot. Like, it helped me get through the whole time I was there.
Thank you, Maya, for sharing such a vulnerable experience. Yeah, so I think one way we can merge these two important and heavily underfunded interventions is a practice known as art therapy, which I think Maya might have touched on just a little bit. So in order for us to understand our framing of what art therapy is, we're going to watch this segment from Papa's 27th episode on youth in the arts.
In this segment, Pop and producers explore the practice of art therapy and its benefits. We sat down with Danetta Watson, an art therapist working with youth. We also spoke to a Pop and producer who tells their story on how art therapy impacted their life. What is art therapy, or how would you define it?
What we're actually doing is helping people to bring out what's going on internally, whether that's their thoughts, experiences, and putting it into an external form, which is the art object, and then processing it, and around that dialogue, reincorporating what came out of that. So it's a dual dance between the internal versus the external, and the art making is that product.
Art therapy is a way to better connect with yourself through any kind of art form, and it's also a way to express yourself in a way that doesn't involve any conventional kind of thinking.
Art comes in many forms. What do you offer for your clients?
So I may offer drawing just with color pencils and markers. We may use painting, so different types of paints, whether that's watercolor, acrylic, or oil. We might do some sculpting, like using clay or some form of like model magic.
I'd say an average session of art therapy is really up to you. Like, you can spend all of your time doing one thing, or you can jump around and do a bunch of different things, and you can start a project or finish one, or just you do you. That's really all it is.
What is the difference between art therapy and traditional therapy, and are the results different?
Non-traditional therapies typically sometimes are referred to as like talk therapies, so meaning that the primary mode of communication, like within that session, regardless of the modality, is talking. And then the main difference between that and with art therapy is that within art, the primary mode of communication is the art making and the creative process.
For me, I think that the deconstructed nature of art therapy is what allows you to express yourself. It's a breakaway from your daily life in order to come into one's own.
What is the most common thing you see among youth when they come for help for you?
It's very generalized, but overall I would say, the majority of the youth that I work with come in with anxiety-related issues or depression or some trauma or grief or loss.
When I first started doing art therapy, I was in Belmont's mental hospital, and that was not a fun time for me. Doing art therapy while I was in there allowed me to not escape the situation that got me in there, but escape being there and more being in the hospital and understand the situation that brought me there better.
For me, being in a private practice setting, what I really notice with clients is just their ability to express themselves maybe more fully and more clearly after you're kind of maybe working your brain to think differently. So when you're creating artwork and you're putting your internal thoughts and feelings and experiences into an art product, it kind of shifts your mind a little bit, your perspective on how you view situations.
Art therapy has grounded me a little bit more. I've come to terms with a lot of feelings that I wouldn't have originally. It just helps me better connect with the present moment and myself.
For a youth who is too afraid to go to art therapy and will be open to do it at home, what do you recommend for them to do?
I would always encourage people to talk to the people around them, talk to their families, and if you feel like it's kind of elevated to more a higher need and that maybe you're not able to get the support from, whoever is in your support unit, then maybe therapy might be an option.
If you're scared of getting help, that's okay. You have to face your fears in order to overcome certain things. But if you want to do something for yourself, by yourself, you can do art therapy.
Okay, sorry. We know that many of you may not be familiar with art therapy or the importance of mental health professionals in combating the school to prison pipeline. So we'll send this question to our therapists, school psychologists, and our panel. How can schools use art and therapy to better understand the social and emotional needs of students? So we don't have to rely on punitive measures.
I can talk a little bit about this one first. Music therapy is a great medium, as well as art therapy, for creativity and expression. Both of those are inherently creative and expressive modalities. And a lot of what art therapists can do and music therapists can do is, like we saw in that clip, take what we are creating and relate it to our lives and what is happening and our situations and our emotional reactions. So it's a lot of using music or using art as a safe space to experience an emotion and then talking about it afterwards, or maybe doing something like sharing songs and lyrics and relating to others that way. It's a lot about connecting with others, especially in a group setting, because music can be so collaborative. It can really work as like a microcosm of other group dynamics in other settings. And we can practice things like working on understanding one another, being in the same space, creating something together, finding your individual space within the whole. All of this stuff that gives you more of a sense of community with the people that you are with and you are creating with, as well as a sense of responsibility for your place in that community. Because especially in a music therapy group, every person is adding something to the experience. So that's a lot of what I believe music therapy and art therapy can bring to a school. And all of those connections that people are learning to make in the music therapy group or in an art therapy session, they can take those out into the school and the school climate and kind of utilize those skills in other settings.
You know, I'll answer that.
I think a lot of the students that I work with are pretty creative, and I think art and therapy, like music therapy and as well as art therapy, can just be another place where students can express themselves and take care of their social emotional needs, and so rather than acting out and getting yourself in bad situations.
So, with art therapy, I've used it a lot, especially as a child. I have to thank my mother and her two best friends, who I forgot were teachers for years. And they really taught me how to express myself through art. And I like to incorporate that with children, because there's nothing like scrolling or writing or drawing your emotions down. You may not have the word for it, but you know what it looks like, or it's a color, it's a sound, it's a way of breathing. And art, what it does, it gives them a chance to let it go or express it. And you don't have kids in trouble. Basically, you don't have them being attacked for trying to express what's bottled up inside of them. So art is wonderful. I've ever since a kid, like my son, when he gets upset, I say, here's a pen and paper, go draw. Just go draw. Don't tear up my walls, go draw. Or go listen to music, because music is something that just, it feeds your soul, and you can find the outlet. It may not be a word, but it may be a piece of music, or it may be, I don't know, just that pause in between. It's so beautiful, and it's a way for our babies, especially our special ed babies, to be able to express what they feel without being punished.
If I could just add one more thing, I think that's a really good point too, because a lot of what I hear in the documentaries that we shared clips from was a lot of the students are expressing that they want to be heard and understood. And I think music and art can be a great vehicle for those connections between people and make you feel heard and understood and seen. Because a lot of times, especially for teenagers, music and art is a way that they form their identities. So a way, when we talk about their music and their art, they're also by extension informing us about themselves. And I think someone who is facilitating those groups would understand how to respond to what they're creating in a way that makes them feel seen and heard, and therefore positive expression, right?
I also want to add something too. Um, I would say, let me see. So like I explained earlier about how I had a chance to be around art and stuff when I was in jail. That just goes to show that, I was 17 around that time. So if students could have the opportunity to just sit in class, whereas though they get like art and music, and sitting there be able to work on some creative stuff, I'm pretty sure they would enjoy that too. Because recently in our staff meeting, we had a workshop, an art workshop. Somebody did with us. Her name was Jackie. She shared a wonderful workshop with us, and I'm like 21, and my staff, like my supervisors and stuff, was probably like 30s and their 40s. So they all enjoyed the workshop, and it goes to shows that art, no matter what age you are, art is always going to be a good therapy for anybody. And it was a week for our self-care week, so we can have self-care stuff, and that was one of our self-care days. And it was so nice just sit there, listen to music, and being able to work on art from with our staff and stuff. And it was just a good opportunity. And also another way is like that's like something you can do way before they even get to a point where as though they cause a harm. And when they do cause a harm, you can always turn to a harm circle. So we are currently working in our organization to launch a restorative justice. We're trying to we're working on harm circles and stuff like that. We're doing our training right now. And when the harm is already done, instead of sending these kids to alternative schools or placement or anything like that, have harm circles and or have arts circles, like have them come together and explain about what's going on, because if you suspend those kids, they just going to go home and they're going to think it's okay. When you create a harm circle and you put these kids together and actually talking about the problem and the situation, it's going to solve the problem more than just sending the kid to an alternative school, sending them to placement. Yeah. So yeah, you create like a art harm circle, like they all come together and they just talk about what's going on and have them, have art therapy and stuff like that. I feel like that would impact the kids more, because I feel like that would help me when I was back in school. Instead of me getting suspended or getting sent to another school, I feel like that would have been way better.
Yeah, as a art student, I agree 100%. Like, me creating my art makes me feel like I have power. And I feel like as Black and brown people, a lot of times we go through life feeling powerless. So me doing photography kind of got rid of that. And now I know what I'm capable of. And through my work, I try to remind other Black people of their power and that they were never powerless and never will be. So I agree with y'all 100%. Thank y'all for sharing.
One thing before we move on. I think that art therapy is especially useful for Black and brown people because sometimes we're tired of using our voice, right? Like we are vocal all the time, and to then go into therapy and have to talk about our problems can be overwhelming. So having a way to express ourselves that isn't the conventional talk therapy is really important. I recently started using art therapy and it's been amazing for me. So at the beginning I was a little tripped for words because I was just thinking about my experience and it was bringing up emotion for me.
I'm great to hear that.
Thank you.
But I think it's important to name the fact that folks have already been fighting and making this fight. People have already been doing this freedom dreaming. Folks at home, again, drop your response in the comments. We would like what will make you feel safe in school? What are your freedom dreams? And while we receive those comments, let's rewind. While we receive those responses, Isham Fred, can you tell us more about your freedom dreams and your current campaigns and demands you're working on to transform schools into a safe space that actually supports its students?
I guess it's Ishmael. I can go first. All right. So with Freedom Dreams, there's many things. So like my role in the Racial Justice Organizing Committee, we have several goals, 13 demands when it comes to education. But we also oversee Black Lives Matter Week at schools, which is part of a national cohort of other folks in other school districts across the nation. And they also go by 4 demands. And those 4 demands are, and I think this simplifies everything, right? Fund counselors, not cops. Hire and retainment of recruitment of more Black educators, the zero tolerance, end of zero tolerance, more restorative practices, and what's the last, John? Blanking on the last one. All right, I blanked on the last one. But all these tell us and guide what campaigns and what type of work and activism we do. So right tonight is in our partnership with you guys, we're popping and even presenting this as part of the Black Lives Matter Week of Action. And it highlights one of the principles of Black Lives Matter Week. But there's also many other activities that we do. We work with other educators in a group called BARS, Building Anti-Racist Educators. And then we just talked about best anti-racist practices in the classroom. We also provide anti-racist training to educators across the district and also outside of the school district. We provided trainings to, faculty and staff at Westchester University, to union leadership in Baltimore. We also are involved in campaigns just generally demanding justice happen in our schools. So you would see one of us represent Racial Justice Organizing Committee at a school board meeting demanding the rights of Black and Brown students across the district and honesty when it comes to it. With Melanated Educators Collective, we're working with an organization called Bar We, Building Anti-Racist White Educators. And we help curate kind of the reading material that they provide to white educators as they kind of discuss and go through a protocol of discussing difficult and complex concepts related to race. And we help kind of guide that process as a consultant aspect. So those are just like some of the things that we're doing right now. Officially, I'm also a teacher for the school district, but I also write curriculum for the school district. So there's a lot of push within the school district for anti-racist curriculum, which a lot of us who are involved in this activist anti-racist work with Racial Justice Organizing Committee are involved in. That's some of the drawings.
And so for us at Philly Student Union, our Police Free Schools campaign has 3 demands. One is to remove all police and school resource officers from Philadelphia Public Schools, have the Office of School Safety replace them with community members trained in de-escalation, restorative justice, and other skills to support healthy schools and communities. And for the district to amend its memorandum of understanding with the Philadelphia Police Department so that disciplinary and school infractions aren't dealt with by calling the cops, that those are addressed by school staff instead of, using school as a gateway for students to enter the school to prison pipeline. So the main thrust of it, though, is that we just believe that students shouldn't be policed in their schools, and that the district shouldn't be investing so much in into that practice, and instead should be using it for things like art therapy, again, as we said, restorative practices, and all of the other things that actually make students feel alive and want to come to school and feel safe.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Ish. Ish, I see here in the comments you remember the 4th one now. If you want to go ahead and share that with us, that would be great.
Yeah, and the reason why, and it's real interesting why I probably forgot it too, because it's demand Black History Ethnic Studies requirement. We already had that in Philadelphia. We've had that since 2005. That's why we focus on the anti-racist push.
Thank you so much, Fred. So at this point, we know the problems. We know that people are already reimagining and organizing for these things, but we know that there are much larger factors at play, and we definitely need to make the connection to school funding. Like, we need to figure out where the money resides. So because of COVID, we're expecting massive budget cuts in the district and citywide, while we're still recovering from the budget cuts of 2013 and the school closures as well. So we're watching the devastating effects of systematic racism and toxic budget priorities right now as the district responds to this deadly pandemic with plastic fans and plywood. According to a national report by the Justice Policy Institute, we spend almost $150,000 per year to incarcerate one juvenile. Yet we only spend $11,000 per public school student, according to the Census Bureau report. So this question goes to our policymaker, Kendra Brooks. Why are we spending so much money on incarceration instead of prevention? How can we ensure that our next budget will prioritize funding of arts programs and counselors in Philly public schools? And Ish and Paige, if you also have something to add, that would be great.
Okay, I'm guessing Ish doesn't have anything to add. Thank you so much for the question. And thank you for having me here today. What we know is that You know, incarceration isn't just expensive for taxpayers, it's also expensive for families and communities, you know, because they are the most impacted by incarceration. When we think of Black, brown, poor, and working class people, it robs them from wealth and it forces them into a perpetual cycle of poverty and violence. Um, you know, our current crisis of mass incarceration is a result of decades of disinvestment in education, in housing, healthcare, and public benefits, and corresponding investments in policing and incarceration. So, you know, it is a system, you know, that this country has developed for decades. We saw it peak during the war on drugs and during the Reagan administration with the tough on crime approach, but it started long before that. It is the result of structural racism and the policies that benefit the wealthy and criminalize the poor, and we know that. Um, so there are many reasons why we spend so much on incarceration, and one of the reasons is that people benefit from incarceration. The reality is that many people see prisons and jails and large police departments as economic engines and job creators. And in order to maintain those jobs, what do they need to do? They need to police people and fill jail cells. Um, Another reason why we see so much incarceration is that we, as elected officials in a country, tend to seek short-term solutions instead of working on short-term solutions for long-term problems. Angela Davis said it best: prisoners do not disappear social problems; they disappear human beings. And if we think about it, in order for us to reduce crime and increase safety and to repair the harm from generations of incarceration and police brutality, we need to make some changes, which is how we're going to address these social problems that we see. And it all starts with funding. And the funding should be investments into housing, right? And jobs, education, libraries, youth programs, and accessible mental health services. But we have people that argue that those things are too expensive, right? They're the same folks that that are okay with these short-term fixes. So they think that locking up people who caused the problem instead of helping them is a solution, but we know it's not. And even in the long run, it in the long run, investing in people saves us far more money if we make, proactive investments into the things that keep communities safe. And those are the things that we constantly are fighting for. And those are also the things that are constantly underfunded. And we all know that. And earlier, the discussion talked about art and music and all these wonderful things, but those are the first thing they pulled out of our education system, right? Earlier, someone spoke about being authentically 100% Black when you speak up for yourself, right? And our folks love music. We come from dance, we come from rhythm, but all of those things were stripped away. And as we began to, move into this new era, and we're calling out things as they are, we have to remember that people benefit off of these systems. And in order for us to get the things that we want, we have to begin to dismantle those systems. I think it was another question. What was it, a part two?
Yeah, so the second part of the question was, how can we prioritize funding arts and counselors in public schools?
Well, this is something that I have been fighting for a long time when we talk about making sure we're prioritizing those things in school. One of the things that is coming down the pipe right now in city government, they're talking about, what is it called? Participatory budgeting. And they're saying, like, with participatory budgeting, it's the first time in Philadelphia that we ever done this. And it would allow direct community involvement in city spending decisions. And what we're doing is the participatory budgeting project is charged with identifying areas of investment and voting directly on how to spend $1 million in capital projects. And we know that's not a lot of money, but it's a start. And the application for that has since passed. But that group will be seeking input from the general public as they move forward. And I think it's, a step in the right direction, even though we need to do so much more. And also we think about the best ways to fight the budget that you want to see is to get organized. There's so many groups involved in this. I come from organizing work, and I know that the best way an individual can get involved, even our young folks, is get involved, join a community organization that works on the issues that you care about, and start a campaign for the budget you want to see. Call and email your city and state leaders and say, this is what we want. Write letters to your elected official. All of these things are ways to make our voices heard. Even host events like this to draw attention to the budget and budget issues, to educate, your network and people on this issue. Public pressure is a powerful tool, and we can't be afraid to use it. And I think that, that's some of the things we can do to make sure that, the investments that we see are the investments that we want.
Thank you so much, Kendra, for your insight and offering your support. A question that I have for you: what other members on your committee or on a state level should we especially put pressure on to see the changes that we want to see?
I feel like, it's not a one size fit all. I think that we should be reaching out to our school board members. They're an important part of this conversation. We need to be reaching out to our state officials because some of the money for funding for education comes from the state budget. And we also need to be reaching out to our federal officials and letting them know, it's like a clarion call. Like, everyone needs to be a part of this process. It's important that we continue and not let up, to say we need these funds to have the schools that we deserve. And I think that we can't be afraid. This is not the time to be, to be shy. Reach out, let your voices be heard, whether you're 12 or 22. Like, we have to be a part of the conversation. So you should know who your district council person is and reach out to them directly. You can also reach out to at-large council people and let them know what your concerns are. You should reach out to your state rep. You should reach out to your congressman. You should reach out to your senator. These are folks that we elected into place to serve our needs. In order for our voices to be heard, we have to continue to reach out and call them out on the things that we need. And right now we're talking about funding for public schools, whether it's for music and arts or it's for, the ability to breathe and safe ventilation systems. We are the people, and there's more power on, the organizing side with everyday people than it is with us electeds. It's far fewer of us than it is of you guys. And we have to continue to push and pressure. And I keep saying we, because I still don't quite see myself as an elected official. I'm a year in, and my fight and passion is still with folks boots on the ground in the street, but collectively, we have to do this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I do want to know, we did invite several people from the school board and several state representatives and senators to this event tonight, and we either got no response or they weren't able to come. So what would you say would be the best mode to push these people to attend events like this and to really take into consideration our wants and needs?
I would say, keep pushing, keep asking, don't stop. Now that I am elected official, our schedules are really crazy and tight. And some folks could have had something else to do, but I wouldn't give up. I would continue to reach out. I would continue to reach out and make phone calls. I would continue to send emails. Everybody has social media, go through social media. You can't let up. If it's something that you're passionate about, you have to continue to be persistent, and that's how you'll get what you want. And for me, I'm a little different. Like, I was a part of Black Lives Matter in Schools Week when it started. I come from grassroots organizing, and I see myself as a movement candidate. And when I say a movement candidate, the folks from community organizing movements are the folks that got me in office. So this is my constituencies. Other folks may not see it quite the same.
Mhm.
So I would still continue to be persistent and reach out. I think persistent is what is going to get us what we want and what we need. And I would say, I encourage you to continue to reach out. There's an education committee. You can go through and send emails to the education committee members at the local level as well as the state level, you know, because that's their focus. Their focus is education. So you can do it very laser focused in on the folks that you want to talk to. But persistence.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I think even like the borders between like a district rep and state rep and local, like sometimes, at least for me, when I first discovered this work and was like trying to understand it, it was a lot to understand. And I think even that, you know, us being educated on who represents us, a lot of times people just go to the polling places having knowledge of just one person on the ballot. So they just ignore these other people who could be doing really good things. So I think also, like adding to what you said, I think advocating for education of local policy and like procedure is really, really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, persistence is it. And I
Right.
just gave you, like there is an education committee with folks, legislators that are focused on education at the city level and at the state level. Focusing on those folks, even state legislators that aren't in the city. Because keep in mind, our state legislators carry the whole state. So there are people on the education committee there that don't necessarily live in Philadelphia, but that does not mean that your voices should not be heard. And I think we have to continue to just, you know, reach out to folks that have the power to, you know, get the things that we need.
Thank you so much, Kendra. Like everything that you're saying, facts. You're spitting fire, as said in the chat.
Literally.
This Paige or Ish want to add anything? I know it might be a little intimidating coming behind Kendra, but
I mean, I guess I can go just real quick off of Kendra. Make sure that I hit everything. So like, you know, just addressing how money is spent and how resources are prioritized within our society, I think speaks to a larger issue that we haven't reconciled, right? We don't speak honestly about what our issues are. We like to pretend we're in a fantasy world. We like to rely on, you know, superficially applied materialism to supplant kind of like desperation and living check to check and living constantly in debt, you know, and you know, unfortunately, that is the majority of Americans now. And if you even if you want to pursue a professional career and have options while you're within that professional career, you have to like almost put yourself in debt unless your family already has wealth. And we already know about the wealth gap between whites and non-whites is extremely wide. So you're talking about people starting off at a zero deficit, needing to go to the negative in order just to make enough income to be competitive in the now.
Right, so I have to pay for the negative.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I think that is completely tied to the reality that we exist in right now. And so instead of talking solutions, we talk about like, you know, tweaking things at the edge, reform this, tweak it here, instead of, you know, like Kendra was just saying, just to veggie back off of her, like to dismantle these systems and these structures that perpetuate these inequalities and these inequities that are inherent, really, in the very structure of this system, baked in the cake, quite frankly. And I think that's how we get it to another point when we think even deeper about, you know, where we need to go in education, where we need to go as we move in these streets, where we need to go as educators, as people, as part of this part of a group of folks trying to find a solution.
Absolutely.
Right. Paige, did you have anything to add?
Sure, I can add, and definitely a very, very hard to follow. So at Education Law Center, we like to say money matters and education justice, and it's true. It is unconscionable how little we spend in this state on education. By the school code's own adequacy measures, we fall $4.6 billion short, and that's billion with a B, right? By their own measure. And if you look at school districts, we know that school districts that educate wider and richer student populations get more money. Like, that is unconscionable. That is why we have the most economically segregated schools in the country, full stop. And some of the most racially segregated schools in the country. A lot of scholars call that double segregation. That's what our communities are living in. That's the reality. And we know that even in school districts that are really struggling in terms of access to wealth, we know that wider school districts get $2,000 more per pupil than school districts that are mainly educating Black kids. And that's just the fact, right? And that has to change, right? If folks are saying they want to invest in education, they got to do it. That's not performing in the DMs. That's not saying you're going to make a commitment. Like, we need the dollars show the conditions in schools, right? If you think about COVID-19, as an attorney, I was getting calls from all sorts of families from around the state. Some parents were saying, hey, my child has more supports than they ever had in a pandemic, and that's great. And other students were offered nothing. And when they were offered nothing at the very beginning, equity concerns were cited as the reason to deprive kids of abilities to learn in a pandemic. And so if we're going to be honest about what we need, schools are, again, part of our ecosystems. And so we need investments in each of those areas. When you think about education, that is a gateway to a lot of different opportunities, and education deprivations like those that our communities have suffered have financial consequences, have literal consequences on how long you are projected to live, what type of conditions you live in, how much policing you're subject to, what your environmental conditions are like. Do you have nutritious foods? Are you subject to environmental racism? What is your day-to-day life experience? And so in order to address those things, we have to address the education budget. Write letters to the editor. Talk about your school conditions. This stuff isn't normal. It can't be, it shouldn't be, and it's not what our future generations deserve. And it's not what students who are in seats learning right now deserve. And we can have a different future than what we have, but it's going to be a big lift. But I'm really.
Thank you so much, Paige, for wrapping that for us. I think something that I heard each person speak touch on either in depth or briefly was this idea of investing in our youth and investing in our future, right? Like, I feel like as it is right now, oh, Kendra, you have something else to add. You can go ahead.
Well, you can go ahead and finish, and then after you're done, I can chime in. I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel like the way the system is now, it's like they expect more of a return on investment if they imprison children rather than educate us, which is sad. And it goes to show just like the deeper structural issues that fall even outside of school budgeting, like to name it what it is, in my opinion, just the capitalistic society that we live in. And I feel like, when we talk about society, we forget that, like everything else, there's a root, and the youth are the root of it. And whatever we're nurtured with is what will grow. So I feel like if we're nurtured more with education and equity and love, and we're taught how to be, and non-Black students are taught how to be anti-racist, and Black students are taught how to be loved and how to be, financially responsible from a young age, we'll see a lot of these issues dissolve quickly.
Yes, that's so good. I know we're coming quick on time, and I just want to kind of highlight two campaigns that we're kind of pushing in my office, and hopefully organizations can rally behind and support, because they're both around funding for schools. And one of them is payment in lieu in taxes. They call it pilots. So for those who don't understand, large institutions like Penn are one of the biggest owners of land in our city, but they don't pay taxes. So we're trying to push for, large nonprofits to pay taxes into our city, and that funding should go directly to schools. Another campaign we're talking about is ending the 10-year tax abatement. We had put legislation on the table around ending the 10-year tax abatement, and we weren't able to move it, but that does not mean we still aren't pushing for it. There's no way that we should allow wealthy developers and wealthy people to move into our city and not pay taxes on property and land where long-term residents are losing houses for the same reason. We have to get in front of that, and that also means getting in front of Governor Wolf's budget. and making sure that that $1.3 billion investment that's supposed to be coming down from schools, that we get every dime of it, and that money is invested into our schools in the way we want to see. But the reality is, you know what, we know that a lot of folks are fighting us. We have Democrats that are fighting these things and Republicans. And we have to continue to organize and stay together. So like I said, I pushed a bill for tax abatement, but I didn't have enough support in city council to move that, last spring. And I also the resolution hearing on pilots. And I'm really trying to build the momentum up around pilots. A lot of folks weren't really sure what it is. And we need to make sure that people understand very clearly about what we mean by pilots, and continue to push so that money can come into our schools. And also in Harrisburg, there are many elected officials in Harrisburg. I mentioned this earlier that, education is not their priority. So we have to continue to push Governor Wolf and elected officials across our state to prioritize education and make sure our Philadelphia students get what they need. So what I need you to do, I need you all to convince people outside of your normal bubble that education is a priority. I understand what it's like to be an organizer and you bringing these issues, back home to your friends and family, and they're having light conversation, and you're talking about dismantling systems. But we need to talk to the people who, usually, I don't want to say don't care, but don't really think about funding for schools, and show them that, as young people, you guys, you can no longer sit back and allow this to happen. Like, we cannot allow these systems to take our educators, our young people, and our communities for granted. We have to organize together. We need to invite people who even disagree with us into spaces like this so they can hear your stories. Storytelling is a powerful tool. We have to continue to tell our stories loud and clear. Every time I hear my speak from Yas, I'm always moved and inspired once again that I need to do more to let my voice be heard for young people. Because we need more than just me. I need more than just me in there to move this legislation. We need more elected officials that are willing to transform our budget. But we need everyone, all hands on deck to make it happen. So, whether it's a full class, like I know Ish is at Kensington Capitol, like, write letters to your district council person, your state rep, and your senator, and saying, this is what we need now. Let's do a whole writing campaign, old school mail, we still get it, blow up the phones. Everyone else does it. We need to make sure our young folks are doing the same. So yeah, I applaud the work that you're already doing, but I want you guys to stay vigilant. Like, your future and the future of your offsprings is dependent on this time right now. And I also can apologize for the laxness of my generation to not ensure these things, but the default from my generation can be a benefit for the next generation, because we need young folks rising to this occasion and fighting for the rights, because all we have to do is change it. It's our duty to fight and change these systems that have, historically kept Black, brown, poor, working class folks behind. And we can do it. And I believe that, I know that I won't rest until it's done. Like, I ran for office fighting for this stuff. I kept getting doors closed in my face, and the only way to get in the room is get in the room. So now I'm in the room and I'm pushing you guys, continue to push and get in those rooms, because that's how we're going to win. And that's how we're going to get the things we need for our communities.
And that's on period. Exactly. And what you stated, like, it intertwines with when it comes to wealthy people moving in, it intertwines with gentrification. And then we got all these wealthy people that's now in our neighborhoods, and they not giving nothing to the community that we was once in. And that intertwines with the society that we live in, made for richer people to become more rich and poor people to stay where they're at, or get worse. This has been a conversation filled with a lot of great ideas, testimonies, and demands. Now we have to ask the question of, how do we make these freedom dreams become reality? How do we fight back, including youth, parents, educators, in this fight along with policymakers on a local and state, national level? So Kendra and then everyone else can answer as well.
I mean, I said we have to continue to organize, let our voices be heard, and we can't lighten up. Like this is a 12-month, 7-day-a-week fight. And I know it gets hard and it's discouraging, but we have to continue to organize and push for the legislation that we want. And if folks aren't moving the way we need to move, we need to replace them. Politics is real. Everybody is replaceable. If we can't get what we want, we put people in place, that think like we do and want to move like we do, and get them elected into office.
I agree. Wholeheartedly agree. For me as a youth and being in organizations like Poppin and having the opportunity to host events like this, not only does it make me feel empowered, it shows me that the changes that I want to see are possible, right? Like a lot of times it feels like our goals are so lofty because we haven't seen them before. We haven't seen police-free schools. I've never been in a school without police officers, even in elementary school, right? I've never been in a school where our art courses went anything beyond just like a once-a-week thing. So I think like it's so important that we not only have these conversations, that we do exactly what Kendra is saying and take action by writing the letters, calling the offices, and letting our voices be heard constantly. Like I feel like a lot of times people like get caught in the moment, like when something major happens, like when a Walter Wallace situation happens here in Philly, people are hyped up, they're ready to make change, and then when the media stops reporting on it or people stop posting about it, we tend to forget that these are all things that happen every day. Like the school to prison pipeline is every day. It hasn't stopped because of COVID. We're still being policed on Zoom by being told we can't wear our do-rags and we can't wear our bonnets, right? Like these are all things that need to be talked about constantly. So yeah. If anyone else wants to add,
can I say something real quick? Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Hey, it's Boogie Rose. Kendra, I love you, Kendra. I love you. Hold on, let me start my video. There we go. All right. First of all, just working and organizing with Kendra was a blessing, is a blessing. Love Kendra. I think my only question or my only ask, and it might even be a statement, is that I think we should really start informing our youth on what it takes to actually become an elected official. I think that I might even be down to create a curriculum for that type of workshop, because I think that not only is it intimidating, but we don't know what goes on in the office. We have no idea what it takes to make certain votes happen. I mean, we don't even know what our elected officials are in charge of. I have several issues or concerns happen in my neighborhood, and everybody's like, well, who do we call for this? And I'm like, yo, honestly, I don't know. Let me just call them both, because I don't know. So I think that we need a breakdown of what each elected official is responsible for and what they're in charge of. I think we also need to know, how do we groom us? At the end of the day, I feel like, a lot of people that are not people of color, they know exactly what they want and how to groom their youth to become those elected officials, but we're intimidated by that. We have no idea what to do about that. So I guess my ask is, how do we create a program where we can start educating us on what it takes to become elected officials and what our elected officials are responsible for?
So before the COVID pandemic, my office was committed into bringing young people into City Hall during council session to experience council session, to see what it's all about. But COVID happened, so that eliminated that program. But I do believe we need to do more. And I think it's not just young people. I think we need to just educate our communities in general as to who's responsible for what and what are the duties of different legislative bodies. I think that's a great idea. I'm willing to be a part of something like that, because I think it's needed. I think that too many, even folks that you think would know better, don't know what the jobs are of various elected positions. So yeah, let's work together, Boogie, and get something planned. I'm 100% in on that. And I can think of other council members that would love to do that as well. We have like one of the youngest council bodies that we've ever had. We have 2 millennials on city council right now. And I'm 2 former teachers as well. So I'm pretty sure there are people in council that would be very interested in moving that away. I mean, they call us the freshman four: myself, council member Jamie Gautier, council member Isaiah Thomas, and council member Catherine Gilmore Richardson. I think that may be something, I can take it to them and see if, we can pull together, because I think it's important.
All right, let's get it, Kendra. Let's get it.
I want to be a part. Wow, we've covered so much in this discussion. It's been great talking to everyone here, hearing student perspective, parent perspective, educators, lawmakers, everyone. Thank you, everyone at home, for watching. So I think we're just about done for the night. But before we go, we would like to show you guys what we were working on with those words that we had you throw out in the chat earlier. So you may have noticed an artist doing their thing on this call. The image you're about to see was created by an artist named Jahada Thomas, and the poem you are about to hear was written by our middle school representative, Nevaeh Sullivan. Both of them used your words as inspiration for their work.
There's a tall wall and it's blocking our peace. We need to call for change and defund our police. School is where we're supposed to find out what we're made to be. Instead, us kids feel like we're walking in and out of slavery. Pro-Black, joyful, nurturing, and freeing are all things that's supposed to be behind a safe school's meaning. Bring back our arts and craft and bring in our school counselors. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to say we defeated S2PP.
I thought we were getting a poem, not a rap. I love that. That was so well said, Nevaeh. Wow, that was just one really powerful example of how we can use art as a way to process our trauma and fight for freedom. Thank you all for joining us tonight in this event. Thank you at home again for watching. Sorry. We know that this discussion is only a small part of the solution, so we hope to work together as collaboratively to impact the parties in fighting for freedom dreaming. If you would like to learn more on how to join or support the organizations represented on this call, or to watch full-length documentaries we showed tonight, please check the resource guide we're now dropping in the chat. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great night, and Black Lives Matter.